When I married Jonathan, I knew I was stepping into more than just a marriage. I was stepping into a history, into a home already marked by love and loss. His son, Noah, was 17 at the time, quiet and polite in that carefully distant way teenagers often are when the world around them shifts too fast. I tried not to expect too much from him in those early months. He had lost his mother only 2 years before, and here I was, a stranger smiling at the dinner table, putting flowers in a vase she probably chose. Jonathan was kind, patient with both of us as we figured out how to be a family. He believed in quiet healing, in time doing its work. I wanted to believe that too. But it was the quiet that got to me. Noah barely spoke to me at first. His hellos were clipped, his thank yous mumbled. He spent most evenings in his room, headphones in, the door always slightly ajar but never quite open. I took small steps, leaving extra food on his plate, asking about his school days without pushing, offering rides when Jonathan worked late. He always accepted with polite nods, but the warmth stayed out of reach. Then something began to shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. It started on a rainy Thursday. Jonathan had a business dinner out of town, and I found myself alone in the house with Noah for the first time. I made pasta, unsure if he'd join me or just grab something later like he usually did. To my surprise, he appeared in the kitchen, hair damp from the shower, in a soft gray hoodie that made him look younger than his years. "Smells good," he said, eyes flicking briefly to mine before settling on the steam rising from the pot. I offered a smile. "There's plenty. If you're hungry." He nodded and sat at the table. We ate mostly in silence, but not the strained kind. This one felt cautious, testing. He asked if I'd always been into cooking, and I told him about the summers the first spent in my grandmother's kitchen. He listened. Really listened. That evening became the first of many small, quiet rituals. We didn't become close overnight, but we found comfort in a rhythm. He started leaving his door open wider, started saying goodnight when he passed the living room. I'd find my tea mug rinsed and left by the sink in the morning, knowing it was him. Still, I never expected to feel what I did the first time our eyes held just a second too long. It was during a movie night. We were halfway through a film I picked on a whim. The rain had returned, tapping the windows softly. Jonathan was away again, a weekend conference in Boston. Noah had sprawled on the opposite end of the couch, our legs angled toward each other. I passed him a bowl of popcorn, and as he took it, our hands brushed. He didn't pull away immediately. I did. I laughed too quickly. "You'll eat it all if I let you." His grin was crooked, warm. "You always say that." I looked at him, really looked, and my chest tightened. He wasn't a boy anymore. That thought hit me like a soft slap. Gentle but impossible to ignore. There was strength in his jaw, depth in his eyes that hadn't been there just months before. And when he looked at me, something lingered. Something unspoken, something not entirely innocent. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind press against the windows. I told myself I was imagining things, misreading glances, twisting kindness into something it wasn't. He was Jonathan's son, my stepson. But the air between us had changed. Over the following weeks, that tension, if I dared to call it that, wove itself between the mundane. A fleeting touch as we passed in the hallway. A laugh shared too closely over dinner. The way his eyes followed me, not with rebellion or resentment, but with curiosity, with attention. One afternoon, I came back from a walk to find him in the kitchen, cooking scrambled eggs. "Thought I'd make you something for once," he said, flipping the eggs like a pro. I smiled, caught off guard. "Didn't know you could cook." "I've been watching," he said, with a sideways glance that made my stomach flip. We ate by the window, the light golden with sunset. And for the first time I noticed how much he'd grown, not just physically but emotionally. He wasn't the sullen teen I had met. He was thoughtful, self-aware. And God help me, I started to feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not by Jonathan. Not even by myself. Later that evening, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My hair slightly undone, my eyes tired, but softer than I remembered. I touched the base of my neck, where his gaze had rested a little too long at dinner, and wondered, was I imagining everything? Or were we both quietly, dangerously, wondering the same thing? The next few days felt like a dream I couldn't quite wake from. Nothing overt happened. No lines were crossed. But something had taken root, something tender, unspoken, and a little dangerous. It lived in the glances we shared when Jonathan wasn't looking. It hid in the quiet pauses between words, in the closeness of our footsteps in the hallway, in the new way Noah said my name, softly like it meant more than it used to. One evening, I found myself standing in the doorway of his room. The door was open, the glow of his desk lamp casting a warm light on the walls. He had music playing, low, thoughtful, wordless. The kind of soundtrack that made everything feel a little more cinematic. He looked up, surprised but not startled. "Hey," he said, pulling off his headphones. "Everything okay?" I hesitated. I don't even remember why I came upstairs. An excuse. A question I didn't really need to ask. "Yeah," I replied, stepping inside. "Just couldn't sleep." He nodded and gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "You want to sit?" I did. And I shouldn't have. But I did. We talked for over an hour, about books, music, school. About grief. About how the house still felt too big sometimes. He opened up in a way that caught me off guard, admitting how much he missed his mother but also how lost he sometimes felt in trying to keep everyone else comfortable. "I felt like I had to be okay for Dad," he said. "And for you. I didn't want to make things harder." My heart clenched. "You never made anything harder, Noah. If anything, you've made things bearable." He looked at me then, really looked, and the weight of his gaze was something I could feel in my chest. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "you seem so alone, even when you're surrounded." I didn't answer right away. What could I say to that? It was true. When Jonathan held my hand at dinner, it felt rehearsed. When he kissed my cheek before leaving for work, it felt like a reflex. There was love, yes, but it was the quiet, dependable kind. The kind that didn't burn anymore. But with Noah, there was a spark. A flicker I didn't want to name, didn't dare name, but I felt it. Every time we spoke. Every time I caught him watching me with eyes that didn't belong to a boy anymore. The next morning, I found a cup of tea waiting for me on the kitchen counter. No note. No announcement. But I knew it was him. And that small gesture, so simple, so intimate, stayed with me all day. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way he leaned in slightly when I spoke. How his voice lowered when we were alone. How he made me laugh without trying too hard. It wasn't flirtation. Not exactly. But it was something. One Saturday afternoon, Jonathan was called into work unexpectedly. I watched him leave from the window, a strange guilt blooming in my chest. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I was relieved. Noah came downstairs not long after, barefoot, his hoodie hanging loosely from his shoulders. "I thought we could watch something," he said casually, holding up the remote. "One of those old movies you love." It felt so natural, curling up on opposite sides of the couch. But halfway through the film, the distance between us narrowed, first by inches, then by breath. I told myself to move, to break the moment, but I didn't. And when he rested his head lightly against my shoulder, I didn't pull away. We stayed like that for the rest of the movie. No words, just warmth, and the sound of rain tapping the windows like a metronome for a song we weren't supposed to sing. Afterward, as I stood in the kitchen washing dishes I didn't need to wash, Noah appeared beside me. "I'm sorry if I crossed a line," he said, his voice quiet. Being close to you felt safe." I turned to him, hands still wet, unsure of what to say. "You didn't," I whispered, though part of me wished I had said something stronger, more definite. His eyes held mine for a moment that felt like an eternity. "I don't want to mess anything up," he said. I could have told him he wasn't. That nothing was happening. That everything was fine. But I didn't. Instead, I said something I didn't fully understand at the time. Sometimes life gives us moments we don't expect. Doesn't mean we act on them. But it also doesn't mean they're not real. And just like that, the space between us became something else entirely. Not love. Not lust. Not yet. But a whisper of something waiting. Breathing. Watching us both from the edges of our restraint. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed beside Jonathan. His steady breathing a rhythm I used to find comforting. But now, the warmth of his body felt distant, like a coat I no longer needed but couldn't bring myself to take off. My mind kept returning to the moment in the kitchen. Noah's voice, low and unsure. His eyes searching mine. The way my pulse quickened with the nearness of him. Was it guilt I felt? Or something else? The next morning was quiet. Jonathan was already gone, and I found Noah in the living room, headphones in, sketching something in a notebook. I stood at the threshold, watching him. There was a softness to his face when he was focused, an almost childlike vulnerability that made my chest ache. He looked up and smiled. Not the kind of smile you give a parent or a teacher, but one that stayed too long, settled too warmly. "Morning," he said. "Morning." I moved to the kitchen and busied myself with making tea, trying to shake the weight of the air between us. I could feel his presence even when I wasn't looking. His gaze like sunlight filtering through blinds, always there, always just enough to warm me. Later that day, I found him in the garden, shirt off, trimming the hedges. The sun caught the lines of his shoulders, and I looked too long before I caught myself. I hated that part of me, the part that noticed, that lingered. But I didn't stop myself from bringing him a glass of lemonade. Or from standing close enough that our fingers touched when he took the glass. "Thanks," he said, his voice hoarse from the heat. "Of course." I smiled, my heart beating far too fast for something so simple. He watched me for a moment, then looked away. "I like when you're around," he said suddenly, quietly. "I mean, just the two of us." The words hung in the air like a thread between us, fragile and trembling. "I do too," I said before I could stop myself. That night after dinner we stayed up watching something light, a comedy neither of us paid attention to. Jonathan was gone for a work trip again, and the house felt suspended in time. I sat on the couch, Noah beside me, closer than before. At one point I shifted, my hand brushing his thigh. Not intentional. Not entirely. But neither of us moved. The room felt heavy with stillness. When I turned to look at him, he was already watching me. His expression unreadable, but not uncertain. And then he reached for my hand. Slowly, carefully. Our fingers interlaced, and I didn't pull away. We sat like that for what felt like forever. No words. No need. Just breath and the steady drum of a boundary dissolving between us. When I finally stood, my hand slipped from his, and we looked at each other for a beat too long. "Good night," I whispered, my voice catching. "Night," he said softly, his eyes still on me. As I walked away, I felt him watching, and every step up the stairs felt like walking deeper into something I couldn't undo. In my room, I leaned against the closed door, heart pounding, hands trembling. I pressed my palms to my chest, trying to still the chaos within me. This wasn't what I had planned when I married Jonathan. This wasn't what I wanted. But in that moment, the truth was impossible to ignore. I didn't feel like a mother to Noah. Not in the way I should. Not anymore. The house was silent. That kind of silence you only hear late at night, when even the walls seem to hush their creaks, and your own heartbeat becomes loud enough to hear. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts churned too loudly. Every glance, every touch, every word Noah and I had exchanged echoing in the quiet. I kept replaying the way his fingers had laced with mine on the couch, the heat that lingered even after I walked away. I should have said something. Should have drawn a line. Instead, I let the silence fill in the spaces between us. I had just slipped under the covers when I heard the floorboards creak outside my door. First I froze. Another step. Then another. Soft knock. Barely audible. I knew who it was before I asked. Yes. The door opened an inch. Then two. Noah stood there in the dim light of the hallway, shadows painting lines across his face. His voice was low, uncertain. "Can I come in? Just for a minute?" My heart was already answering before I even nodded. He stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind him with a gentle click. The air felt immediately different, as if the room had pulled its breath in. "I couldn't sleep either," he said, standing there like he wasn't sure if he should come closer. I sat up, pulling the blanket around me, but not out of modesty. It was more like protection, from him, from myself. "Too much on your mind?" I asked softly. He nodded, taking a few steps forward until he stood beside the bed. "Mostly you," he admitted. The words struck like a chord I wasn't ready for, reverberating in the quiet. "Noah," I began, but he interrupted. I know this is wrong, or it should be. But it doesn't feel that way. Not with you. It never has." He sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to get too close. But I could feel the tension pulsing between us, that quiet thread we'd been tugging at for weeks, now stretched to its breaking point. "I've tried to ignore it," he said, his voice more fragile than I'd ever heard it. "But tonight, when you looked at me like that, I couldn't stop thinking about it." I should have stopped him. I should have said something, anything, to shift the conversation, to rebuild the walls we'd been slowly dismantling. But I didn't. Instead, I reached for his hand again. And just like before, he laced his fingers through mine, like he'd been waiting for permission. I looked at him, his face inches from mine now. His eyes searching, hesitant. Then, without a word, he leaned in. His lips brushed mine, not in hunger, not in haste, but like a question, tentative and trembling. And I answered. The kiss was soft, low. A secret spoken aloud for the first time. His hand rose to cup my cheek, and I melted into the moment, forgetting where we were, what we were. There was no resistance, only release, like we had both been holding our breath for too long. When we finally pulled away, he stayed close, his forehead resting gently against mine. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm not," I whispered back. And that was the truth. For better or worse, the moment had come. We sat there in the dark, our hands still entwined, saying nothing more. We both knew the weight of what had just happened. But in that sliver of night, we let it be just that. A moment. Kiss. Truth. The beginning of something neither of us fully understood. Jonathan came back 2 days later. The moment I heard his car pull into the driveway, something inside me tightened. A mix of guilt, fear, and something more complicated. I moved quickly through the house, trying to smooth everything into place. The throw on the couch. The mug Noah left in the sink. The air itself. Noah was in his room when Jonathan stepped through the front door, suitcase in hand, tie loose and eyes tired. I greeted him with a smile that felt too tight around the edges, a kiss on the cheek that didn't linger. "Long trip?" "Yes." "Long enough," he muttered, setting down his bag. "I missed you." "I missed you too." The words felt practiced, hollow, but necessary. Dinner that night was quiet. Jonathan caught us up on his meetings, on the hotel's awful coffee, on how his colleague had missed a flight and nearly tanked the presentation. I laughed in the right places. Kept my eyes on my plate. Noah, for his part, played it perfectly. He was calm. Casual. Maybe even too casual. He asked Jonathan about the trip, joked with him, helped clear the plates after dinner. But I saw it, the way he avoided looking at me too long. The way his hand brushed mine for a split second too long when we reached for the same dish. Jonathan noticed too. Not in any overt way. But something in his demeanor shifted. Barely, subtly. The occasional pause in his speech. The narrowed eyes. The way his hand touched the back of my chair when he stood up from the table, possessive and quiet. After dinner, I went to the kitchen to wash the last of the dishes, grateful for the excuse to be alone. The sound of water filled the silence until I felt someone behind me. I turned, half expecting Noah. It was Jonathan. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "Of course," I replied too quickly. "Just tired." He watched me carefully, then nodded. You've been quiet. It's just been a strange few days, I said. With you gone. The house felt different. He stepped forward, gently brushing my arm. Different how? I smiled faintly. Just quieter. That's all. His eyes searched mine for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then he kissed my forehead and walked away. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Later that night, I stood in the hallway outside Noah's room. The door was closed. A barrier we both needed. A reminder of the line we had already crossed. We didn't speak that night. Not with words. But the silence was thick, heavy with the weight of the kiss we hadn't forgotten, and the man who now slept between us, unknowingly. The next morning, over breakfast, Jonathan watched us more than he usually did. He asked Noah about school, about his weekend, about the book he was reading. Innocent questions. But there was something in his tone, carefully neutral, slightly too pointed. Noah answered easily. He was good at this, better than I was. I felt Jonathan's gaze settle on me more than once. Kept my face composed. Smiled when I should. Responded when I had to. But I knew. He didn't know. But he suspected. And that was almost worse. Later that afternoon, as I folded laundry in the quiet of the bedroom, Noah slipped in silently. I think he knows something, he said, voice low. Not knows, I whispered. But he feels it. We have to be careful. Noah stepped closer, and my breath caught when I felt his hand on mine. We stood there, surrounded by the soft scent of fabric and soap and something we couldn't name. I hate pretending, he said. I know. He looked at me, eyes full of everything we couldn't say out loud. But for now, I murmured. We have to. He nodded slowly, then turned and left the room. And I stood there alone, my hands trembling over a pile of clean towels, trying to remember which version of myself I was supposed to be.